Hey everybody, welcome back to Crawl TV. My name is Jarrett, and today I'm going to be showing you how to replace the clutch mechanism parts on your CJ7, CJ5, CJ8, CJ6. Let's just call it the CJ series Jeeps. This mechanism mounts to the firewall and actually connects the pedal to the throwout bearing in your transmission. It's mostly just a grease part, but it does have a couple of plastic bushings and some rubber boots that we're going to refresh. And while we're in there doing that, I'm also going to raise my clutch mechanism up. This Jeep used to have a body lift on it, and we got rid of that. So now I have some interference with the frame, and we want to make sure that that mechanism is up and out of the way. So this should be a pretty easy job. Let's jump into it. So if you guys remember, in the last video, I actually removed the body lift from this Jeep and replaced it with factory body mounts. It looks much better, but I did run into one small issue, and that was with my clutch mechanism. So I'll show you that here, what it currently looks like and what the problem is. You can see that this bracket right here is actually contacting my frame. There's no gap between those two parts, and that is a tub mounted part and a frame mounted part, so they shouldn't be touching at all. What you guys pointed out to me in the comments on that video, which was really helpful, is that this bracket actually has a third hole that's not being used. So the driver side of this bracket is adjustable and actually can be moved up and out of the way, which is a really simple project. But since I'm already going to be removing this bracket from the Jeep, I might as well get that old dry rubber replaced. And there's actually supposed to be a plastic bushing on that pin that's not there. And we're going to fill this thing up with grease at the same time. So we're going to attack a couple of different issues and get this thing freshened up so that it can make it through the Rubicon Trail this summer and down the road in future years. I'm going to go grab my tools and a tripod so that we can get started, but I don't expect this to be a big project if you're doing this at your house. Well, let's wait till the end of the video until I make any promises, but I don't think this is going to be very complicated. And also, if you're wondering where my seats are, I'm working on a PRP Comp Elite seat installation project right now. I have the seats, I have the brackets for them. I'm just waiting on the harness bar to show up, and it has been delayed a few times, but I need to know what the depth of this bar is before I put the seats in, because I want to put my seat as far back as I can, but I don't want to run into some kind of interference issue there as well. So that project is on hold. In the meantime, we'll work on things that are a little bit more pressing and get the small, easy stuff done and out of the way. All right, so these are the tools that I grabbed. I have this Tecton tool set. I have this in 1/4 inch, 3/8, and 1/2 inch, and I also have a 1/2 inch impact box from Tecton. These tools are awesome. I really love the tool rolls that they sell. It makes it really handy if you just want to pack up your wrenches and go. If you remember back in the day, I used to carry all of my tools in like a Air Force helmet bag. Super inconvenient. Having everything organized like this has made my life super easy. And no, this is not sponsored. I do not work with Tecton, but just wanted to point out how great these tools are. So first things first, right here is our crown rebuild kit per se for that clutch assembly. And I'll open this thing up one-handed here. Here is that kit from Crown Performance Parts. There's not much to it. 2 plastic bushings, the metal clip which holds the whole clutch mechanism in place, and then the 2 rubber boots. So not much to it. It looks like there's only about 4 bolts for us to remove from the Jeep. So we'll get that part out and then lay it down here on the Polaris. We are doing field work here. The Jeep is not in the driveway, so I'm not next to a shop. But since this is such an easy project, it shouldn't be that big of a deal. So let's jump under that Jeep and get that part out. These are 1/2 inch nuts in here. Looks like they're going to come out easily. So we're off to a good start here. The next 2 bolts are attached to the bell housing itself. Those weren't terribly tight, so this has so far come out pretty easy. Now this pin, or rod, I guess, that's adjustable that connects to your throwout bearing here, where it connects is actually just like a pin in a socket. So I believe this whole piece should come out as one. The only thing that we will have to remove is where the mechanism attaches to the pedal, and I think that that's just a cotter pin. It is going to be out of your view right now. That cotter pin is toast, and just like that, the pedal is disconnected. Now this whole thing should just come out. We'll take these old rubber boots with it, and let's take this over to the Polaris, clean it up, replace those bushings, and we can put it back in at the correct height. Okay, so here are the pieces of our clutch mechanism. This is the bell housing side, this is the firewall side, and then this is the mechanism itself. I left the pin on because we're just doing a very quick fix up and replacement of these parts. These were the boots that were on the mechanism. You can see how they're just completely shot out, and we had both pins still in place somehow, but one of them wasn't doing anything at all, and the other one was holding in one plastic bushing on one side. I dropped that thing a second ago, and I don't know where it went, but we have the tube here that's supposed to be full of grease. You can see that it is just completely empty. It's bone dry. So in putting all this back together, once we get those plastic bushings inside of this, like a Chinese finger trap here, once we get those pins pushed in, we're going to pump this full of grease, and then it should last quite a while. The whole purpose of this tube is just to be kind of a grease tube. So it's a very simple mechanism here. There's not a lot to it. This should be a very easy process. But before I start throwing everything back together, I am going to clean up all the gunk that's on these pins. I'll clean up this bracket, not extremely thoroughly. I just want to have it slightly clean. This one's pretty enough. I'll just leave it the way it is. And then I'll just clean this up and hit it with a quick spritz of black spray paint, I think. And then, or maybe not. It depends on how well it cleans up. But regardless, we'll get it all cleaned up, and then we're going to start throwing this back together with that Crown Performance kit. This should be a very, very, very straightforward and simple process. These heavy-duty shop rags, I bought this roll at AutoZone. They make the regular shop rags, but then they also sell a heavy-duty version of the shop rags, and I'm not kidding. You can use these things like Scotch-Brite. They're so sturdy, they don't rip apart. You can actually wipe parts down pretty aggressively with them, and you're not going to tear them. So pretty good stuff. You can see how much gunk I got out of that pin. Now that rubber boot can actually fit behind that lip on it the way that it's supposed to. So we have both pins cleaned up. It does look like somebody at one time grabbed the ball of this pin with a pair of pliers. I'm not going to try and go through and smooth everything out. It should be okay, but you can tell somebody was a little bit rough on this thing at one point. I am going to paint this just because it's rust colored. The mechanism itself is in good enough shape. I'm going to leave that alone. So I'll be right back with a black part that looks just like this one. It's time to put this thing back together now. And it's a pretty simple process to put it back together. These two plastic bushings in the kit are identical. The only difference is the size of the boots. At first I was like, I shouldn't have, you know, taken this all apart without making note of which side is which. But if you look at the size of the pins, one is small and one is large, so it's pretty obvious that it would go on small bushing on the small pin and big bushing on the big pin. So we'll get these on first. So next we'll do the same with the large pin. There we go, that boot is on as well. So we have both pins booted up. Now these bushings just snap onto the balls of the pins like that. So we'll put a bushing on both pins, and then we'll get the pins put into the mechanism. And remember, this was the bell housing side, so we'll put this pin in, and then this was the firewall side, so we'll put this pin in. And then the last thing we have to do is put the clips in. My kit was missing one of the clips, so I picked the best of the two clips that I took off, and we're going to reuse that. So we just have to peel this boot back a little bit so that we can get this clip on, just like that. Okay, now the purpose of these clips is to hold those plastic bushings in place. So make sure when you do this, you push those plastic bushings inside the tube. There we go. I got the pin inside the boot. I'm going to do the same on this side. It'll keep that pin in place. The bushing will seal to the tube, and we'll be ready to pump this thing full of grease. Okay, new lock and load fitting on the grease gun, new tube of grease. I just happen to have that stuff on hand. Let's try it out. There we go. I can feel it filling up the tube. Now it's creating hydraulic pressure and it's pushing this pin out. So we know we're full of grease. I'm gonna stop there. It actually pushed the boot off the pin a little bit, so I gotta fix that now. Okay, we're back in business. Got that boot adjusted. Try and avoid doing that if you can. That was a big pain in the butt. So now we got this piece, new bushings, new boots. It's greased. Let's put it back in the Jeep. I'm gonna try and get this thing put in the same order that I took it out. So the first thing that I'm gonna do is replace this cotter pin that connects the pedal to the assembly once it's in place. And then I will hand tighten the bolts before coming in here with the wrenches. If you remember in the last video, I moved the fuel line above this mechanism. But now that I'm moving this mechanism up, I'm gonna try and put the fuel line below it, see how that looks. And if it doesn't look right, I'll move it back to being above it again. But since we're playing with the height on these things, I think that'll change a few things. All right, so both of those bolt holes are stripped. Those weren't terribly tight, so this has so far come out pretty easy. One of them, I can run a longer bolt through and put a nut on, no problem. So I'm not worried about that one. The other one, I'm not so sure about. So I'll be right back. I want to see if I have any longer bolts. I doubt I do. I'm probably gonna have to go to a hardware store for this. Okay, well that took me a minute. What happened was the bracket that goes into the bell housing had two little like 1-inch bolts, and both of them had aluminum in the threads. They were stripped out. So I had to go up to the wood shop and find the best that I could that matched that thread pitch, which happened to be Allen heads. They'll work. I mean, I'd rather find hex heads. Oops, I dropped a nut. I'd rather have hex heads, but beggars can't be choosers. I live like half an hour from the hardware store, and if I want to get this done before my doctor's appointment today, I got to use what I got. So at some point I may replace them, but for now, at least I have a couple different sizes and lengths of what I need. We'll get this thing put back together. All right, well, crisis averted. Those two Allen head bolts worked just fine. It was just the first couple of threads that were pulled out, so putting in longer bolts, getting a better bite on that should be just fine. Now that that's done, I went ahead and put the driver's side in as well. So we have this all hooked up. Moving this bracket up allowed me to use nuts on both of them. When it's in that lower position, you actually have to have a bolt through it. So now it's just reattached with those 2 nuts. Everything's back in place. The fuel line did end up going back underneath the mechanism. It seems to fit better there. And then I went ahead and adjusted that clutch linkage so that this is correct and tightened back up. Hopefully, if you're doing this yourself, you don't run into an issue where those factory bolts are pulling the threads out of the bell housing. That was not something I wanted to run into today. And then later down the road, we can focus on the bigger problems like that weld right there, and getting the bushings replaced in the shackles and the leaf springs and all that other stuff. So we're making progress. That's the important part. Hopefully my next video will be the PRP seats once that part arrives. So thank you guys for watching this video. I always appreciate the views. Please leave a comment down below if you have any suggestions on how I did this, what could have made it easier. Maybe the next person that comes along can learn something before they jump into it. But overall, this was a really easy project. My takeaway notes are, if you buy the Crown Performance Kit, once again, do not throw away anything, because I was missing one of the clips for this kit, which meant that I had to reuse it. The cotter pin for the clutch rod, that doesn't come in the kit, so I had to reuse that cotter pin. And aside from that, be easy on your bolts. Even removing them, be easy on them, because you'll pull that aluminum, that soft aluminum thread out with those bolts out of the bell housing, and then you'll have to get longer bolts. You'll have to put nuts on the back of them. You have to get creative like I did. And I think that's about it. Grab some grease, grab some towels, clean up your parts, paint them if you want to. This project should take you about an hour. It's a pretty easy one. So thanks again for watching, you guys, and I will see you on the next episode of Crawl TV as we continue to knock the project list down on this Jeep. The Rubicon Trail is only 6 months away.